Welcome back to Dead Good Book Reviews. I'm Judith and you're watching another review here on the channel. This is my first non-overbooked review video since being on hiatus, so it feels momentous and exciting. This is one of the very few books I actually managed to read while on hiatus. You've seen the title, you've seen the thumbnail. We're talking about The Winter Garden by Alexandra Bell. Oh no, this is the first video I've had to film since changing my setup. Where is this actually going to be visible? Nope. Hang on. Yes? It'll do. If it falls on me in the video, it'll be funny. Some quick disclaimers before we start. I was sent this free review copy of this book from the publisher. I went to a showcase that they did. It was very exciting. Got to hear about a lot of new books. They said, "You want to read this?" I said yes. They sent it to me. Regardless of where it came from, nobody's paying me to talk about books and all opinions are my own. I'm also going to keep this review as spoiler-free as humanly possible. I'm going to try my best. I think it's going to be okay. I don't think anything's going to be spoiled for you, but if you do want to go in knowing absolutely nothing, pause this video, go read the book, come back. We'll talk about it then. I also want to say that while the blurb of this book might lead you to believe otherwise, this is a book that requires some quite strong content warnings, not all of which I can say on YouTube, because YouTube's like, oh no, you're talking about those things, I'm going to demonetize you. And it's like, I'm trying to warn people that these things are... Anyway, go and look them up. They'll be on Storygraph, I'm sure. We'll get into them a little bit later in the video, but it's just safe to say, if you're sensitive to things, look these up. Somebody recommended that for me, and I found it much more helpful to go in knowing that was what I was going to get, or I think I would have had a very different reading experience with this book. Just saying. The Winter Garden is a new book from author Alexandra Bell. As I've mentioned, it actually came out on August 30th, so I'm a little bit late, but I'm justifying it to myself by saying that if you watch this review and you hadn't heard of the book before, you'll now be able to go into bookshops and say, hey, I heard about this great book, and they'll say, yes, we have it, or more likely, no, we don't have it, we'll order it in for you, because that happens more often than not, doesn't it? So that's how I'm justifying this slightly late review to myself. This is the ARC cover. I expect it's fairly similar to the actual cover, but I will put that up. I've not actually looked up what that looks like. Here you go. I'd call it a adult historical fantasy with maybe more of a lean to a kind of light fantasy more than a historically accurate kind of book. I think that's where I would shelve it personally. Before I was doing the research for this video, I genuinely believed I'd never read a book by Alexandra Bell before. I was like, no, never heard of her, don't know what she's doing. Turns out I have. I don't remember if anyone remembers way back when I read Music and Malice in Hurricane Town. I don't really want to get into it here. Let's suffice to say I was not such a huge fan of that book. But it's very different from this book, so I'm not going to get into that in this because it's not really relevant. If it was like a sequel or they were marketing it based off the success of that book, I maybe feel differently, but this is kind of its own thing. Alexandra Bell has written a whole bunch of things, ranging from middle grade all the way through to adult, all the way through to sci-fi. There's fantasy in there. She's written heaps, most of which I haven't read. Her background pre-writing was in law, but I don't think she ever went down that path. I think she was writing beforehand. I'll link her website, as I usually try and do, if you would like to find out more information. So our story starts with 8-year-old Beatrice, who, on the night her mother dies, gains access to the Winter Garden, a spectacular, somewhat magical garden where she witnesses amazing things, only to have it disappear, and then nobody believes that she's found it. We've all heard this story before. There are fairies at the bottom of the garden. It's that kind of vibe. Skipping ahead, Beatrice is a young woman now, and she's travelling the world, seeking out wonders, seeking out wonderful things, trying to get noticed as a scholar, and also trying to prove that the Winter Garden existed and trying to find it again for herself. Her and her friend Rosa both receive invitations to create wonderful pleasure gardens, the prize for which will be a wish granted by the Winter Garden. They both want it desperately, but is the chance to change your life forever worth what it takes to win? Blah, blah, blah. I read this and I went in with fairly low expectations, to be perfectly honest, and I certainly learned my lesson. Well, no. Let's reframe this slightly. I initially thought, I don't know how I'm going to feel about this book, and then Asher, who I will link below, read it and said it was really good and maybe mentioned some content warnings that I might want to keep in mind. And so I went in with mixed expectations. That's probably a better way to say it. But actually, I found this book really, really enjoyable, impactful, interesting, all of the above. I think the setting is absolutely beautiful. Now, this book has been compared to The Night Circus a fair amount already, and if you are a Night Circus fan, you will doubtless have been burned many times by the Night Circus comparison. I want to go out on a limb here and say that of all the books I have read that have promised to be Night Circus-ish, this is one of the ones that has got closest in terms of the level of magic available and the level of explanation, the kind of wondrous things that you see that you think, goodness, I'd like to find out more about that. but obviously the book doesn't go down that route, so you don't see it. And some of the kind of competition aspects of it are similar to the Night Circus, I guess. I still don't think it quite captures the Night Circus for me, but I wonder if you read them in the other order, you would definitely compare the two. The comparison is warranted. There's always caveats there. Often when things get compared to the Night Circus, they feel really wanky. Caravel, Once Upon a Broken Heart. Not to completely bash one author specifically. In this case, I think it just was interesting. I think because the focus was on gardens, in that way that the Night Circus is focused on a circus, I think it works, and I think it keeps it focused enough that you're not just like, the whole world is wonderful, and it's like wild, extravagant parties. It's very specific things, and actually the darker aspects of this book, there are children screaming outside. I don't know if this microphone will be picking that up. The darker aspects of this book really play into that, and it creates a wonderful contrast, which is something that I always really appreciate in books, between these magical gardens where people are finding escape and solace, and their real lives, which are actually very sad and drawing on a lot of things that women may have had to go through in the day. Speaking of women, we have these two main female protagonists. The blurb kind of leads you to believe this is going to be mostly about Beatrice. It's actually pretty evenly split between Beatrice and Rosa. They have points in their lives where they could have gone in very similar directions and actually go in very different directions, and I really liked that about them. And what I liked about this book was that there is conflict between these two women. There are things that they disagree on, there are things that they both want that they can't both have, and that kind of thing. But it's never a man. Broadly speaking, that's probably too much of a generalization, but it's not a case of like, I want to marry him. Gah! And I really appreciated that. I think that was meant for a more interesting and realistic dynamic. I also love that these are both women who are doing things. Rosa is a sort of mechanic. Rosa makes clockwork creations. Beautiful, extravagant, intricate clockwork creatures and things, and that's really fascinating. And obviously Beatrice is this scholar. She's going out and seeking out new things and writing papers. They're very different women, but differently skilled women. Oh, it hits me in all the right places. You know I love women doing stuff. I could just cut that, you know I love women. Yes, interesting dynamic between these two characters, and a lot of their interaction is actually through letters. There's a few scenes where they're together, but broadly speaking, you're watching two very similar stories but go down very different tracks, I suppose. While I'm not a historian for this period, I don't think I could even tell you which period this book is set in. I'm okay. I think that the historical details in this book are really nice touch points. So we have these pleasure gardens, which obviously were a thing. We have orchid hunting, which was a thing. And I think I like those realistic touch points for making the whole book feel more real, even though you've got magic happening in the everyday and plants and things that do not actually exist. We still have this sense of there's reality here, and I think, again, where that comes into there are still dark things happening, the parallels that you can draw are very interesting. As I say, if you are a historian of the period this is meant to be, you might feel completely differently and be like, that's a completely unrealistic depiction of what orchid hunting was like. Maybe, but I think the fact that this book leans so heavily on the fantasy means that you can kind of excuse that. Touch points with reality, I appreciated them. Some cons, some things you might want to bear in mind. I've already mentioned the content warnings. I do think that they are well worth keeping in consideration, especially since kind of the blurb and the kind of marketing of the book doesn't necessarily naturally lead you to think about the things that are going to happen. I'm trying not to get too into it because I don't feel like it's my place to. I've talked a bit about how this book is about women in a particular period in history, and I think you can probably guess the kind of things that goes into it. I will say for the most part I thought it was handled really well, and having spoken to some people who've gone through similar things to these characters, I think that it is at least in some way researched, and I wouldn't say don't read it because of these things. Obviously we read upsetting books all the time, but don't go in thinking like, happy, wonderful, magical garden time, because you might be a bit, shocked. Another thing that I'm mentioning as a con, mainly because I know it's a con for my mother. Hi mum, I don't think you're watching this, but this is a light magic world. There is magic involved in various ways in this world, and I think it's never really explained how magical things are and what is accepted as possible and what's not possible, and I personally don't mind that. I like a world that is just inherently magical. I find it enjoyable. Don't get me wrong, love a hard magic system as well, but something where it's just like, yeah, this works. I appreciate the freedom of that, but if that's something you don't enjoy or that's something that annoys you in a book, this is maybe one to avoid. Equally, if that's something you love in a book, go for it. I'm reminded a bit of Watchmaker of Filigree Street is a good example of that kind of energy behind it. One of my last cons is font choices. I'm going to see if I can get the camera to focus on one of the pages of letters. Obviously this is an ARC copy. I don't know for certain that this is the final font. Oh, here we go. So it does the thing Are you going to focus on that? I don't know. Maybe, I can't see. Handwriting font. I just think that sometimes it's a bit unnecessary and makes it harder to read and enjoy. And I don't know if that's the case in the finished copy, but I thought it was worth bringing up. And lastly, Beatrice, one of the main characters, does have a speech impediment. She has a stutter at the start of the book. That's one of the things that I think, content warning for bad medical management because of past medical ideas of that. I think that I am obviously not the right person to say like this was great representation or this was bad representation, so I urge you to seek out some Own Voices reviews on that. If you are an Own Voices reviewer and you would like my copy, I will gladly send it to you. And yeah, just if you have any thoughts on that, let me know. I will be looking for some more thoughts, but just thought that would be worth mentioning. So some comparisons. I meant to bring these upstairs and then I forgot. I think I have a few of them up here. The Night Circus is a maybe. I've mentioned it a fair amount here. I think that's the one that you're going to be compared to the most. It's going to be compared to the most. You might be compared to it. I don't know. I also wondered about The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. This has, again, that similar kind of happy subject for a book in a lot of ways, but it has a lot of sadness to it and a lot of exploration of loneliness. And yeah, I wondered about that. Can I get this back on the shelf? Oh, yes I can. In terms of like female scholarship and things, this may just be because I was reading them at the same time, but the Memoirs of Lady Trent, the Natural History of Dragons books, potentially there's a little bit of crossover there. This is less academic and obviously less of a kind of slightly humorous, wry kind of tone, but there's something there. And I've put Malice in there. I don't know why. I think I was trying to think of like women being badly treated, but that's in a very fairy tale-y context. But you know, maybe go and read Malice. I haven't talked about it a huge amount on this channel, but I did enjoy it as a book. So my final thoughts. I don't think this is going to be a book that absolutely everyone will enjoy, but I think that there is a lot about this book that's really good, and a lot of things that I wasn't expecting at all. It's really taught me that I need to not judge a book by whose book club it has been in. And that's all I'll say in that area, because this book definitely surprised me. I think it's really solid, and it's probably a testament to writers developing their skill and continually doing so. If this has piqued your interest, I would say go for it. If this is something that you were maybe on the fence about and you weren't sure if it was going to be good or not, I would say it leans more into the good. And yeah, if you're planning on reading this, or if you have any thoughts on this kind of genre of Night Circus-esque historical fantasy books, plonk them in the comments below. I would love to hear them while you're down there commenting. You can also subscribe if you haven't already. It makes me feel loved and appreciated. You can also follow me on all of my social media. Come join us on Discord. It's all linked below. We have a wonderful time chatting about books. That's all from me, and I will see you in the next one. There's gonna be some bloopers now. Hey, I'm gonna keep thwacking my knee. Clockwork. I was gonna say cogwork and clockwork at the same time, and I said clockwork. There is reality.